You are listening to the Enormocast.
Now, we all know that Sportiva makes the best climbing shoes this side of the Parthenon. But it turns out that even the most dedicated dirtbags have to spend an ungodly amount of time on the flats among the sad, lost, lowland civilians. And that's where Sportiva's approach shoes come in. Legends like the Boulder X can comfortably scramble you up slabs, boulders, easy pitches until the big guns come out. And for when you're not actually in the mountains, well, as you peruse the hemp milk selection at the whole paycheck, nothing says I've climbed El Cap like a brightly colored pair of TX3s that are relentlessly scuffing the floor. Bellied up to the bar for that post-near-death experience beer, let them know those gobies didn't come from labor with a pair of impossibly lightweight TX2s. After all, isn't the day-to-day drudgery just a protracted scramble to the next climb? Whether you're actually at the cliff or just standing up in your best friend's wedding, you better be ready in a pair of multi-sport approach shoes from Sportiva. Does your partner suffer from try-it-again syndrome? Or one-hangitis? Or even worse, delusional performance disorder? Well, there really isn't a cure for DPD, except for a good smackdown. But it does probably mean that you've been belaying them for hours and hours on end, and are now suffering from BNP, or belaying neck pain, a stiffness in the cervical spine just below the occipital region of your thick skull. But now there's a cure for BNP resulting from DPD. Ask your doctor about belay specs, and when he doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, just smile and tuck that prescription for opiates away for your next overseas plane flight. But then ask several strangers about belay specs. Ask that cute barista at the coffee shop on the corner about belay specs. In fact, ask everyone you know about belay specs. Keep talking about belay specs until nobody wants to climb with you anyway. Problem solved. But if that doesn't work, then go to belayspecs.com and get yourself a pair. And don't forget to enter Enormocast at checkout for a discount and to help out the podcast. Side effects may include people thinking you're staring at them when you're not, old trad climbers rolling their eyes, people putting them on for the first time and saying, ooh, that's trippy, people insisting they don't like those weird glasses even though they've never even tried them. If you feel drowsy, nauseous, or rumbling in your stomach, horny, confused, or have strange, vivid dreams, this probably has nothing to do with belay specs. It is more likely from that bug you picked up in that backpacker's hostel in Rio after 5 too many caipirinhas. Belayspecs.com. Say adios to belayer neck pain.
Listen, where are you playing in town? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
big
big
house.
place,
sold
that
it
side
out.
of town. That's a big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats?
You
really should.
The hell are you doing? I couldn't sleep. I'm checking the ropes. There was a frayed end on your rope, and I'm cutting it out.
Bad weather. No, later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is July 30th, 2018, about 10:30 here in Colorado, Carbondale, Colorado, the world headquarters of the Enormocast. This is episode 155 of the podcast, an interview with Dean Fidelman. And this one is hot off the presses. I just talked to Dean at the end of the trade show. I'm not actually at OR trade show last week in Denver, but got a message from him that he was in Boulder, and we'd been trying to get it done for at least a year or so when he was here in Colorado last time, and I missed him. So I basically just dropped everything and headed up to Boulder to sit down with Dean in Lynn Hill's office. How cool is that? I'm in Lynn Hill's office, interviewing Dean Fidelman, talking about the Stonemasters quite a bit in this one. And as many of you probably know, Lynn was a Stonemaster of sorts. I don't know if she actually identifies herself as a Stonemaster. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't, but she was around. And the cool thing is that Dean brought his A game. He actually is a fan of the show and is an admirer of what we do here at the Enormocast. And as an artist, I think he
bears all a lot in his work, and he decided to come with his A game to the Enormocast. And I'm very excited to put this one out. And I'm going to actually put it out in 2 parts, which I'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, Dean got down and dirty with talking about the history of the Stonemasters. He was a Stonemaster. He was also very much part of the Stone Monkeys, the latter-day kind of version of the Stonemasters in the 90s and early aughts. And in between, we talk about art, we talk about love, we talk about life, we talk about death. It's quite a far-reaching and far-ranging conversation with Dean, who's seen a lot. He's been a dirtbag of sorts and a Yosemite denizen for, going on 40 years now. He's been hanging out and collecting photos of the scene there in Yosemite, and then his research and his books, have brought him back to even earlier days, going back all the way to the 50s. But the reason I wanted to jump on this and get this one out is because Dean's got a Kickstarter. One of the more infamous things he is known for are the Stone Nude calendars, which have come around and come out for 20 years now. It's coming up on the 20th anniversary of the Stone Nudes calendars, and he's got a Kickstarter where you can basically simply pre-order your calendar. There's all sorts of levels of donations, but that's kind of the most basic one. He can make sure that there's enough orders to warrant putting the time and money into this thing. But there's some higher level donations and to get some prints, some signed portfolios and things like that. So if you're interested in supporting Dean, supporting art like what he does, and if you're interested in that calendar, check it out over at thekickstarter.com. I will put the link with this post. You can just go to Kickstarter and search Stone Nudes and figure out where it is. And Dean is actually not looking for very much money to get this thing done and get it out there. But as you'll hear in the interview, he, not unlike the royal we here at the Enormocast, is sort of allergic to making money. And I would love to see that Kickstarter actually blow the lid off of it, and maybe Dean would actually feel okay about paying himself a little bit for doing this work that he does. So head over there and see if you can find a way to support Dean in this particular endeavor, and keep him stoked to keep doing this kind of stuff, because this will be the last Stone Nudes calendar, also 20th and done. He's moving on to different stuff, but he's got a lot of ideas for other projects, so hook a brother up. Okay, and finally, I'm going to cut this one in half. We actually talked for about an hour, 40 minutes, which would be a long single episode even for the Enormocast, which we can go on. And there's a good cutting point in the middle. We talk a lot in the first half about the Stonemasters and that whole scene, and Dean's coming up as a photographer. And then the second half is a lot more personal, I think. And we get to the Stone Monkeys, but also a lot more about life and how he came about doing his own projects after moving on from the Stonemaster group and what he was looking for in life. So I'm also going to put these out pretty close to back. I'm going to try to put the next one out just in a couple days. So they'll be sitting there as a 2-part series you can listen to all at once, or, split them apart, however you want to do it. And I think I need to make up an episode from back in February to hit my 24 a year mark. I think I missed one. I can't really remember. So I do plan on putting out 2 more in August anyway. So there'll be a whole pile of Enormocast for you to delve into. Okay, that's it. Let's get it done. I think we did important work here, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
It'd be great if we could all climb free and naked as wee little spider monkeys, leaping and bounding up rocks with nothing but our birthday suits and belief. But we can't, can we? At least not in mixed company. So when it's time to gear up and protect your sensitive bits on the next adventure, please consider that Black Diamond Equipment has been supporting the Enormocast for 6 years, nearly from its inception. BD had faith in the project as soon as they got wind of its enormous stature, and they've been helping melt the cheese on the delicious ear burger that is the Enormocast ever since. So please consider that next time you open your wallet for a spanky new piece of gear. Black Diamond, proud sponsor of the Enormocast.
It's really great to be here, and thanks for making this happen, because we tried, you were here a little while ago.
Yeah. last year, I think.
I do this like face-to-face rule, and it's tricky sometimes.
Yeah,
but
it's the best way.
I feel like
that's how I work.
Yeah, and we were just talking about that.
Yeah, we were talking about that,
so let's start with that then. I mean, I want to get into your creative process and as an artist in climbing.
I started my very beginning really briefly, which was when I was 14 years old, living in the San Fernando Valley in California. I took a high school photography class, and I really enjoyed it. And the teacher, Warren Shelton, was an old-time Sierra clubber who'd climbed out of Talkeets and probably Joshua Tree and maybe Yosemite a little bit, but he bouldered a little bit out at Stony Point, which was about 10 miles away from where I lived in the San Fernando Valley. So one of the special assignments you could pick was to take photographs of the climbers at Stony Point. And so I chose that one. And I rode my bike the 10 miles from my house, which is very close to the school. Got out there with my camera. It was later in the afternoon, and I remember there was a girl bouldering, a woman. Probably, she must have been about 18 or 19. And I thought, truly I did think, she would look amazing nude. And I had never really seen a nude woman in person at this point in my life, mind you. I maybe had seen a couple photographs, I'm certain. But I think I ended up taking a photograph of her, and I put that in for the extra assignment or extra credit assignment. And the next year I was into advanced photography. But I began going out to Stony Point, mostly to find that girl, because I had chatted her up as a 14-year-old, maybe 15-year-old at this point.
Did you say what year this was about?
This would have been 1971, 1972, that time.
Right.
I think
so you're shooting with what?
I had a...
Sorry, I interrupted the flow.
No, that's fine. No, I had a Minolta.
Okay.
SR 101.
Okay.
Which I'd gotten by mowing lawns for the summer.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so you're back out at Stony Point.
So I back out at Stony Point.
Looking for your lady
sort
friend,
of like
your muse.
Stalking this muse.
Looking for your muse.
And she had a boyfriend, which kind of bummed me out, but he was cool, and they showed me how to boulder, and so I continued going out there, and I got better and better, and met more and more people, and
it's cool that there was a bouldering scene in 1971 at Stony Point.
There was.
I mean, that's actually, like early bouldering scene.
Yeah, and when I made the 50s book, I actually have photos of Royal Robbins bouldering and climbing at Stony Point in like 1951 when he was like 13 or 14 years old. So that history went all the way back, probably even further. But so at this point, I'd met this guy named Sean Curtis, and he was probably a year older, had a driver's license, and his father was a doctor. He lived in Encino, and he had money and a car, and he had climbed out of Joshua Tree, and I had only heard of such a place. So one day we got into the car, and Sean was also a photographer as well, a really good one. And I'll get to that point later. But we drove out to Joshua Tree, and on the way out to Joshua Tree, I'm 15 years old, and on the way out to Joshua Tree, I had my first experience with marijuana. And it was amazing, and we got high. And then we get out to Joshua Tree right around sunset, and these guys decided we were going to do a mass ascent of Mike's books. And I had never done anything besides bouldering, and I had no idea. And it was sunset, and we all climbed up this thing. It was 5'5", and it was really fun. I remember it was just the greatest time. We got to the top, and then we drank some wine. And I'd never drank wine before. So now I'm drunk and stoned on top, and it's dark. And we're stumbling down these chimneys. And we get to this place where we have to make a rappel. And I remember I rappelled down right into the water crack, and my feet got stuck, and it was the most adventurous, funnest time of my life, I think, to start those adventures, and that's where I got addicted, I think, to places and adventure like that, and because, I'm experiencing everything. I'm drunk, I'm stoned,
right.
I'm climbing, I'm stuck.
You're with some older kids.
I'm with some older kids.
That are being cool to you.
Yeah, and they're being really cool.
Right.
And they know about climbing with ropes. And this is, and I'm probably going to meet a chick soon.
Right, any minute.
Any second here, right? So I think that weekend I made a lot of photos as well. And Sean made photos. And he, had a darkroom at home because, his father was into photography as well. And he invited me to that place and kind of mentored me as we started making these photographs. And then was in Yosemite the next summer, like would have been 72 or 73, 72. I think I hitchhiked there, and I had like $50. And I met like John Yablonsky and a few other people. And I think I met Tobin Sorensen and Mike Graham. And they were Southern California climbers talking suicide. And I had been to those places. And we got along. And so they said, hey, when you're down in Talk Eats, look us up. And so they were the original Stonемasters along with John Long, who I already read some of his stuff. He had been writing. He was about a year earlier than us, or 2 years earlier than me. And so I got down there, and right around that time, also I met John Backer out at Stony Point. And he was a middle-class kid like me. So there wasn't a lot of money, but he had a car, an old Corvair, piece of shit, 1960. Like unsafe at any speed.
Right, that was that car, right?
Yeah, that was the car.
That movie, right? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It was a wonderful car. And I met him out at Stony Point, and I, already been climbing with the Stonemasters for about a year, and but I hadn't done Valhalla yet, and that was kind of the entrance exam to it. So anyway, I met Backer, and I said, let's go climbing. And he had never really been doing that much rope climbing. And I took him out to Joshua Tree, or he had a car. So I needed a car. I had a bicycle. It wasn't going to work. So we got in the car. Yeah. We drove out to Joshua Tree, and I saw John Long, who I'd met a few months earlier, and Tobin and those guys. And I said, hey, this is my friend John Backer. He climbs well, because he was bouldering really hard at Stony Point. That's what caught my eye. Very aesthetic, very hard. I think I took some photographs, because I was still taking photographs of the climbers out at Stony Point. That was kind of my thing. Making photographs brings me joy. That's all I can say. Climbing brings me joy. I don't climb very hard, but I climb so I'm happy, and so it's always been that way. And being with my friends has always brought me joy. So Backer was quickly absorbed into that group, and I think within a month or so, me, Backer, and Tobin Sorensen went and did one of the earlier ascents of Valhalla. And so we were kind of in the club. And we were going to be climbing with those guys. And then I think I did it again with Tobin and Eric Erickson about a month later. And so everything was kind of fleshing out and moving into this kind of critical mass, because what was going on with John Long was he was, this energy, this ball of energy. And he was into philosophy, into writing, and he was kind of aware that there was this movement going on, and he'd climbed with Bridwell like a couple summers earlier, so he knew what was going on into Yosemite, and John was the alpha among these alphas, and we followed his lead, and we acted like he acted, and we adopted a lot of things from him because he was fucking cool for us. Yeah. And so we became that group of Stonemasters. We called ourselves Stonemasters, and in 1973 we kind of all started to migrate into the valley. Because earlier, what we do is in the winter we'd be in Joshua Tree, then in the spring we go to Talk Eats, and then in the summer we decided we're going to go to Yosemite into the fall, and we repeat the process. And so we got to Yosemite, and at that time, Bridwell, who was King of SAR, was mentoring Ron Kelk and John Yablonsky and Kevin Worrell and Mark Chapman and a number of others. And then we showed up right at the same time. So bang, you have this critical mass of really good, young, hot climbers, right, that are way into being cool, because that's what's going on around us is coolness. And it's that critical mass had been reached. And all these climbs are waiting to be done free. As if they were aid climbs, they were waiting to be done free. And if they were undone, they were waiting to get done. And John Long had an eye for that, had been doing that with Rick Yakimaza and those guys, all of us out in Joshua Tree and at Talk Eat Suicide. We were doing that stuff. We were trying to surpass the generation that came before us immediately, because they had authored those routes. There they were written. We knew what they were. Did those routes, dispatched them quickly, in fact. Went on to the next route. So, and the same thing was going on with that crew up in Northern California, the Bridwell crew. Those guys were dispatching routes. So when we got together, and Bridwell had this eye for partnering people up, and he partnered Calc up with Backer, and Graham up with this guy, because Graham was more technical, climbing walls, and Mike Graham was way into designing and inventing stuff. Even at 18, 19 years old, he was fabricating sliding nuts and working on ideas for portaledges even then. And Bridwell saw that, and Long understood that.
And that was Graham of Gramici.
Yeah, of Gramici products. And the thing is...
Because that was his nickname, right?
Yeah, we called him Gramici. So at one point, we all had nicknames within the group.
Right.
I was, of course, Bullwinkle.
Right.
And Mike Graham, he was named after Emilio Camici.
Right, the Italian.
The Italian who died in the 30s in a top roping accident at a bouldering place.
What?
Yeah, who knows what happened exactly.
Wow.
Sounds like somebody was like drinking wine and let go of the rope.
Right. But other than that, he was famous Dolomite climber.
Yeah, he had the thing was he had style.
Yeah,
he was style.
Right.
He had the photograph where he's in the knickers with the white with no shirt.
Right.
And the rope around his waist, and he's jamming something, right? And Mike Graham, he's like, yeah, we were all about style then. And this was the time of dog-ton and Z-boys and white painter pants and headbands and long hair and thrift store shirts and that kind of stuff. It was about the style and how you looked part of that time,
so
right?
that skater style was influencing you
surf,
guys. Skate,
climb.
Yeah,
it was all that same kind of influence was going on. But we wanted to climb with style, and the reason why we could climb with style was because the level was 5'11", 5'10", right? And we were strong young bucks.
Right.
Any strong young buck could climb 5'10", and we knew we could. And after a while, since the ceiling is low here, right? And you're climbing it as well as you can, spacing out gear, hanging on the holds, kicking your feet loose, starting the solo stuff, getting it out there because it's not out there to you. You've got more than enough strength for 510B.
Right.
No worries, right? These days, the level is so much higher, and the climbers are so much higher. But we were climbing at the top levels. And so when we all got to Yosemite, we had that critical mass, I think, in like 73. And we all in the fall would go back home and climb, and the Southern California climbers would climb together, and the Northern guys would do their thing. And I was taking photographs all along, and I was kind of aware that others were taking photographs too. And they were my friends, and I would show my photographs, and sometimes I would see the other photographs, but more likely than not, I never saw what came out of anyone else's camera. But I was very much aware that people were making photographs. And this is a reference later on in the Stonemaster book. But so by 1975, we were fully formed. And, they called us the 16 and mean. I think I was maybe 17, but whatever. We were, I'd gotten out of school. I had graduated from high school early at 16 and a half. And we would go up to Yosemite, and we were like all on SAR because we were Bridwell's boys.
Right.
And the waitresses at the lodge, at the Four Seasons restaurant, there was a restaurant there, were all young girls, young women that loved us. And they lived, over by the dorms. And you would come up there in the spring, you would get a girlfriend, and you'd be on SAR, and you'd hang with your girlfriend, and you hang with your SAR guys. But your girlfriends would all know each other, and everybody would live close to each other. And then every Wednesday, they would have a barbecue for all their boyfriends, who were all your Stonemaster buddies.
Right.
And they would have a big spaghetti feast because we had no money.
Right.
There was nothing. But back then, for $1, man, you can get 4 cans of tuna fish. Dude.
Yeah.
That'll sustain you.
A lot of protein, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of protein. And for another $1, you can get 4 things of macaroni and cheese, right? So I think you got tuna mac there.
Yeah, for sure.
And that worked.
Right.
Especially in like a nice young 18-year-old body. Keep you skinny enough to climb. And we were all skinny. All the ribs showed. We were working out. And roots started falling, and in 75, the nose goes in a day with Bridwell and Long and West Bay, and their hands were directly tied to our hands, and then Astroman with Calc, Backer, and Long, a huge aid climb that goes free, and then all kinds of little things in between, and really hard bouldering, and just living that life, and dispassionately understanding that, 1, I was totally in love with Yosemite. 2, I was completely in love with climbing, and 3, I was in love with my friends, and that's all I needed. That's all I wanted. That was it. I felt that anything beyond that, I had no need for. And
were you aware of guys like Glenn Denny in terms of photography?
Yes.
Yeah, because I've always sort of connected you in that line. Like he's
one of my mentors.
Yeah, he was the guy for the Golden Age and all that, and doing the same thing. Taking
same with Glenn Denny and Tom Frost.
Right.
And those are the photographs that I more than likely did see growing up in the magazines. And later in life, before I made my first book, I was around with Glenn when he made his first book.
Okay.
And so I was introduced to him through Dean Potter and through the photo editor at Patagonia, Jane Siebert.
Okay, so quite a bit later.
Yeah, quite a bit later. and since that point, he has become a mentor to me. On my 50s book, on my Stonemaster book, he invites me into his home. I can look through boxes of photographs. So, I mean, that's a dream come true.
Right.
But so I was directly influenced by Glenn Denny. I was directly influenced by Tom Frost, English photographer named John Clear. They all shot black and white. They all made photographs of their friends. And that's kind of what I was doing without thinking of that lineage. But I was definitely influenced by that. I was making black and white photographs because I could process them in my parents' bathroom at home at night.
Right.
You know, and then I could go and use Sean's darkroom and print them or wherever I needed to do. And I started getting jobs in the photo industry working in darkrooms. And so on the weekends I would go climbing with my friends, and then, you know, and I quit the jobs in the spring. And since I was skilled, I'd always get the job back or another one doing the same thing. And so every weekend, I remember every Monday when I'd come back, before I'd process customers' film, I would process my own. And I remember the sting on the gobies on my hands I put it into the hypo clear, which is basically salt water. I go, oh yeah, damn it, I got to get some better technique.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we didn't use tape.
You're paying for it.
I was paying for it and everything. And then that next weekend, I would bring out the photographs and to show Backer or Yabo or whoever, Michael Kunsky, all these guys that were in the photographs, and they dug it. And I've since seen photographs that Tom Frost took and both Glenn and Denny took, where they're showing their own photographs to these guys back in the 50s, right? And the guys are like, yeah, man, you know, it's like you're doing this for your friends, but they dig it because you're doing it for some reason. You're good at it,
right?
You're better than the other ones at it, and so I knew that's what I had to bring to the group, because everybody brought something. Like Mike Ram was an inventor, and Backer was a free soloist, and Tobin was a alpinist, and John Long was the writer, you know. And so I became that kind of photographer,
right?
I think because I felt like that's what I could do the best for the group, with no other thing that when everyone saw the photographs they laughed or they loved them, you know.
Well, and if people aren't aware, it's like Glenn Denny, Tom Frost. I mean, most of those very iconic photos from the golden age that you see over and over again printed here and there, you know, that's those guys,
right?
Yeah, you know, and we've seen them all over and over and over again. And it's basically they've created our image of what that world was like,
right?
You know, right or wrong or without detail or whatever, but you can't think of Camp 4 and the Robbins age without those pictures flashing through your brain. It's wild. I mean, they created like a reality in a sense.
Very much so. And I know that when I saw those images, and I was really very much aware of other photographers' work. I always went to museums. I always was looking at that stuff, and I could see what was good, and I could see that their work was really good, and I could see that their work captured my community, which was their community, which was our community, and I know that it influenced how I made my photographs. That, you know, this is, you know, wow, you know, this guy is just, he's just reading something in this photograph, and this other guy's smoking over here, and this other guy's doing something there, and that's really cool. It looks really cool. And when I made my photographs, I saw that in there.
Right.
You know, oh yeah, Backer's like goofing, and this guy is not goofing, and this guy is completely out of it. I can see it click. I would make my photograph.
Right.
And then I'd show the results amongst a little group. And I know early on that both John had tried to get some of the work published, and they actually used to have a photo contest for Climbing magazine, and my work was always roundly rejected.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man.
And the early soloing stuff, no one would print until the National Enquirer, which is the first magazine to print my work, printed some photos I took of John Backer soloing like Bearded Cabbage, which I made with John's camera, I think, and with the headline something like Mountain Climbs Rock. Kind of, you know, it was kind of a banal thing. Good photograph, kind of banal, but I was kind of proud. It was in a National Enquirer,
right?
And so it's a national publication, right? You wouldn't have that.
It has the word national right there.
It's got that right there. So I was like, didn't get paid for it. I'm sure fucking whoever Backer, I think, submitted it must have gotten something. He owes me that. But otherwise, it was internal, all amongst our friends, and just to do that. And then I thought, I should become a photographer. I like this, but I didn't know what I thought. Some reason magically, my photographs would start making money.
Right,
I didn't
right.
have an idea
of what it meant to be a
what it
professional
meant, and I was
photo,
too busy climbing
Yeah.
and really having fun with my friends and like doing Stonemaster stuff where like you dine and dash, for instance. So one Easter, we'd all go up to the valley at Easter. That usually would be the start of the season. And there was Mike Leklinski and Maury Gingery and John Backer and John Yablonsky, and a bunch of us were all hanging together. And every morning we would go to the Four Seasons restaurant, and we usually would know the waitress because she's one of our girlfriends or whatever, and they would serve us. And when it came to paying the check, everyone would give me the money. And from that money, I would leave a really fat tip. And then I would go up to the cash register when I saw that there was people in front of the cash register and hang out there, pocket the bill, ask for change back, and then add to the tip, and then walk out the other door, and everybody's already gone. And I did this every morning and every evening for a week once. And, so we would do that kind of stuff. There was the plane crash.
Right.
And when the Lockheed Lodestar crashed into Merced Lake, and someone who was sleeping with someone's daughter that was a ranger came up with the information, and everyone went up there and got weed. And I didn't get to the plane, but I actually sold a lot of the weed and smoked a ton of the weed. But and Bridwell was our mentor, and everything was open. You could shoplift, you could do whatever you had to do to survive to get there. And it was all petty, nothing malicious, just simple stuff. And I thought my life was always going to be that way, and in some ways it still is. But that's, I felt huge moments of satisfaction, I think, early on climbing and being in those areas and making that about my life. In the late 70s, early 80s, I went to school. No, it would have been like 81. I went to school in Santa Barbara for photography, Brooks Institute, which is a very technical school of commercial photography.
Can I ask you a question along those lines? Because we always think of that era, the 70s, late 70s, early late 70s. And interesting, like I just talked to Max Jones and Mark Hugh,
right on,
who were not Stonemasters, but they were there.
They were definitely
kicking
there.
ass.
Yeah, they were
kicking ass.
For sure.
But they also bailed. I mean, that was 79. Was their last kind of real big season. So what was sort of the sea change, in your opinion, that really marks that middle, late 70s as like you guys' own golden era in terms of that?
So what happens is, I've noticed in Yosemite is every 7 to 10 years there's a generational shift. And just like from the guys in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, they grew up having to have a career. So you had a career, a family, that was your life, and then you climbed. The shift started really in the late 60s or, until the 70s when we just wanted to climb. But we were all getting into it when we were 15 and 16 years old. So by the time we were in our early 20s, or it would have been the late 70s or the early 80s, you're in your change. You might be going to school. You probably have a girlfriend. Then there wasn't a lot of women that climbed. You needed to have more money because now you have a car. There is a lot of pressures on change. And I think really that's kind of what happens in climbing. And then within that 10 years, there's been these other young people that have got into it. And they're obviously, they're standing on your shoulders, but they're also younger and stronger than you. And so, and also as these guys aged, they became more competitive, and because that's the only thing you had in climbing. There was no money. Right. So the only thing you can do is compete.
For prestige, yeah.
Right. You have to push yourselves forward, right? And competition is what does that. It's flat out what does it. And I think it's always driven climbing, right? You not only want to be better yourself, but you want to better that guy, your friend. It's friendly, or sometimes it's not. But I think what happened then was, it was that there was a lot of younger climbers coming in. There was also a lot of Europeans coming over. Early on, it was only English, and then it became German.
Yeah, the Stefan Lovax, he showed
or
up
even
about
before that, Wolfgang
80.
Gulitz.
Yeah, and Gulitz
was.
Yeah.
I was one of the first people that had met him, and I took him on a tour of the bouldering in Yosemite. It was Wolfgang, this other guy named Hans, and I can't remember the other guy's name, Peter or something. I met him, and I decided to sandbag him because that's what you did back then, right? So I took him on a tour of the boulders, and still do.
Yeah.
I took him on a tour of the boulders in my tennis shoes and was sending all these really hard problems, mostly because I had him so dialed, and also because I really wanted to impress these fuckers, right? And then they'd try with shoes on, and they couldn't get anywhere because they're used to working stuff, but it's like stuff I had dialed, right? And there's no crash pads, and it's high ball. And so I'm kind of embarrassing him a little bit, and I can see him looking at me. And then the very next day, I'm going on my circuit again to Boulder, and I come around the corner, and on one of the higher things, there's Wolfgang on a rope.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he's doing the problem, and I just sort of hid a little bit, and I watched, and I was like, oh, he's doing the problem. But I'd never seen anyone ever top rope a boulder. That just wasn't done. A boulder's a boulder. No matter how high the boulder is, it's a boulder.
Right.
You don't use a rope on a boulder. You use a rope on a climb. So in that period of time, also Backer, like in 81, 82, went over to Sport Check, which was a German trade show. This is before we had any trade shows here. So they did have professional climbers, and there was organizations there that provided money for climbers to climb and equip routes, even then in the early 80s. And Backer saw that. That started to filter in. Backer and Ron became kind of more competitive with each other and kind of broke off from each other. And I think one of the things, more telling things, is really earlier in like 76 or 77 when Backer, first Calc went up and led every pitch on Astroman. Then Backer went up and led every pitch on Astroman. Now that's a statement, right? And if you notice, every professional climber since has had to lead every pitch. What about your partner? So what I saw what happening was in the late 70s, it was more about the individual and less about the team and the group, right? Because during the group, we would do first ascents, but we would do mass first ascents. Somebody would lead the thing, and then 20 guys would follow it. It was all about the group, and nobody really cared about the credit. But then people started caring about the credit because, well, you're maturing, you need money. If you want to get money from climbing back then, it was sort of a gimmicky thing that you had to do, and they had to understand who you were.
Right.
And I think that's what was going on. And also Backer started to solo a lot. And that shift between a soloist and a climber, there's a gulf, in a way, between the two. And Ron is a climber. He likes climbing on the rope. He likes pushing himself and moving and doing his thing. Backer wanted to be as pure as possible. And that's really, and he felt that he was a dancer, and so he was a soloist. So you had this shift in the late 70s into the early 80s with European ethics coming in, and with the Stonemasters going their own ways. Mike Graham was starting the company Gramici Products. John Long was going to school and working in a gas station in Las Vegas with Lynn Hill, who was working in Vegas, trying to make a buck, and they were climbing out there at Red Rocks. And people were moving to that stage where they expected more out of life or wanted more out of life. Therefore, you needed a job and a career and so on and so forth. And it just wasn't going to happen in climbing. Backer was doing it. After a while, Lynn was able to. John was a writer, and I made my photos. But if you were a carpenter, you weren't going to be there all the time. Right. And if whatever you were going to do, you were going to be doing that. And so this younger generation is going to filter in, and they're going to make their mark. And I think the 80s had a lot to do with wall climbing, and the less about the free climbing. Right. And so Yosemite kind of went into that for a kind of a really long time until like 94, when Lynn Hill ended up freeing the nose. And then it started a whole new thing, which ended up becoming the Stone Monkeys in some way, which we'll get to eventually. But in this wandering
let's settle in
thing going on.
So you went to college. I interrupted. Oh, actually, you know what? I have one more interruption.
Yeah. No problem.
About that era, because you've been talking about the girlfriends. It's definitely a man's world.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, but there were a couple ladies like Mari.
Mari Gingery.
Mari Gingery appears. Lynn appears.
Lynn Hill appears. I remember when she first appeared. I can't tell the exact story, but she showed up. Basically, she showed up with a friend, and then she probably had heard of John Long, But she saw us immediately. Right. Like, she showed up with a friend at Joshua Tree. She'd been climbing at Joshua Tree with relatives, and she had a boyfriend, I think, that knew us tangentially. And so she showed up.
He should have never introduced her.
He should have never introduced.
What a stupid boyfriend.
Silly boyfriend, because at that time, John Long was at the height of his powers.
Right.
And it didn't take long to persuade, Lynn that John was a really interesting person. But I do remember that particular weekend, we were all into soloing and simul climbing. And we'd solo up something and get high and then down climb it, as a group. And it was like 5'8". 5'9". Some guys were doing harder, but whatever, just as a evening thing after a whole day of running around soloing or doing new routes or whatever. And I remember we all went up on the dog leg. I think we all may have soloed the dog leg out of Joshua Tree's 5'8". Really fun climb. And we all got this little alcove. And in this little alcove, you can sort of walk on the small ledge around a corner to like a chimney, and then you down climb. But right in front of us, there was this boulder at the top of the alcove, kind of. And there was these holds on the boulder, and they were kind of marginal looking holds. And the holds overhung the climb, so if you actually got on these holds, you would whistle down about 80 feet to the ground, right? And I remember Long looked up there and remarked, could be a route there, but those holds are kind of jingus. And Lynn had followed us up this climb. We hardly knew her. She was with us, right? She immediately jumped on those holds. She's pulling up on them and looking around. She looked really comfortable. She's like 16 years old, It's like, and I immediately knew that this person was different. Like, she was immediately like us, but even more so, right? Because just like looking at her pull on those holds, you could see that there was something there that was really special.
She must have been tiny.
She was tiny, and she was a gymnast, and
right.
and she had absolutely no fear. And I'm not sure exactly what caused that, but it worked to her advantage. And so she quickly became part of that group, and their group was kind of growing and absorbing more people. And like Russ Walling, the Fish, and those guys, they had their own little group, but they were part of our group, and we kind of ruled Joshua Tree for sure. And it was basically an us and them kind of situation, like us being the Stonemasters and our friends, and them being people who climbed in helmets.
Right.
Which, I have no issues right now, but back then, they climbed with helmets, they climbed very slow, and they had big boots. Like very fat
We
roads.
know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so they were them, and we were us. And then everybody else, of course, was them, because we were trying to just be this climbing revolutionary kind of thing. And we were in the Bruce Lee movies, and The Warrior's Way, and people like Yabu doing incredibly crazy things, and just... Like I say, every weekend was something you really look forward to. And then, of course, the spring and the summer is when you're going to lose your job and just go to Yosemite and do your thing. And it was endless. And then I went to school in the 80s, photography school at Brooks. And they didn't really like me there very much because all my photos for all the assignments were somehow climbing photos. Like, take a portrait of your friend in his environment, his work environment, right? Yeah, that's easy enough. I'll take a picture of a climber with a 4x5 camera. I go, all right. So I put the camera on the ledge, tilted it over, had my friend soloing up to me, take the photo. And they were complaining about it. And I was working there as a janitor at night to make ends meet. And eventually they fired me from the janitor's job. I think part of the reason was I was using a darkroom in after hours. And anyway, they fired me. And basically they kicked me out of school. And so... I continued to make climbing photographs, and I had met a woman in school. We went to New York, and I was in New York for about 4 or 5 years. About 4 years, I went to Europe for a couple of years as a photographer. First, I was making photographs of still life, like blenders, toasters, lawnmowers for catalogs, that silly sort of things on white, seamless paper. And then I went into making photographs of fashion photographs, women, and moved to Milan for like a year or so and made fashion photographs there. And then I moved back to the States. And by that point, the 80s was kind of well established as far as the whole sport bolting war kind of thing that had gone on with the whole ethical wars. Was kind of inflamed, but they kind of figured it out. And whatever hybrid we have now is what ended up being. But that was kind of the end of my era. Which would have been like by the mid to the late 80s. It was done with the concept of climbing with a partner, putting in the gear, taking out the gear, having this one-off adventure, hippie John Muir,
right,
wasn't completely replaced at all.
Right.
But it was gone in a lot of ways. And it was gone, and that's why that's why the numbers in climbing have increased. So the difficulty was favored over the risk, but we enjoyed the risk because that was part of our adventure. But the difficulty is part of someone else's adventure now. And, as I've aged, I've strived and struggled to remain open. And as an artist, if you don't remain open, you will not make new work. And your work that you are making will have no joy in it because you're a closed person. So I don't exactly embrace everything and every change, but I'm completely open to people who do, and I can't judge anyone. Mostly because I never stopped my work in climbing and who I've worked with. I met Sharma, I think, when he was 16 years old. So most of this happened through Charles Cole. And Charles Cole was one of the Stonemasters, tangentially, but he was there a little bit later in the 70s, and he hung out with us. And I love Charles. We got along really well. Charles didn't take drugs. He didn't drink. But we would take acid, all of us, Backer and everyone, Yabo. We take acid out of Joshua Tree, wander around in the desert soloing and babbling. And Charles Cole would be right along with us, wandering, soloing, and babbling. But completely sober. Yeah. But
that's an art.
Yeah, I believe so too. And he was able to hang with us.
That he can hang out with people on acid and not be just like completely annoyed.
Is an art. Yeah, soloing on acid and you're not annoyed. And I mean, soloing on acid is fun. I remember doing this thing where both Michael Klinsky did it first, and then Backer does it. So you don't know how hard it is, right?
Yeah, well, the Enormocast does not officially endorse soloing on acid.
Okay.
So. No, I'm just joking. We don't care. Go for it. Have a good time.
So you don't know how hard the thing is when those two guys do it, because they're going to do everything perfectly, right? Plus you're on acid, so you just really don't know anything. So I remember getting on the thing after those, and they were on top, and they were staring down at me, like staring with that acid stare. And I was getting a little self-conscious, and halfway up this probably easy 5'9" or 5'10" hand crack, I had crossed up my sequence. And I knew it was crossed up. And I'm trying to figure it out because I'm really frying at this point. And I remember looking up and looking right into Michael Klinsky's eyes and Backer's eyes. And they look back at me and they go, "You're fucking up." I go, "I know." And they go, "Well, you better not fuck up here." I go, "No." And they go, "No." And so I climbed to the top. I mean, that was pretty much simple. But it was like, I was experiencing life. I was an artist amongst my friends, living this life. I went to the school. I went to New York. I came back after Europe. And was still doing commercial work, but I was not getting any joy from it at all. None. Zero. I was struggling to get money. I was making photographs of music, making videos. This would have been the early 90s. And one day Lynn Hill calls me out of the blue and said, you need to make climbing photographs again, because I think that you have something to offer to climbing, that climbing is lost. And I was like, "Well, what's that?" She goes, "I don't know, but that's what I feel. I feel like you have this as an artist. Maybe you should approach it as an artist." And I was, like I say, was really unhappy chasing money and making photographs for money. Making photographs for money actually stressed the hell out of me, and I didn't want to do that at all. And the people I was working with, when you grow up in this climbing community like I did, you trust that other person with your life. When they're on the other end of the rope, or they're spotting you, or if you get hurt someplace, they're going to do their damnedest to get you out of there at their own expense or whatever. But you're working in music industry or stuff. Those guys, they don't even know how to get you out of anywhere, And so I just decided, I think you're right. I went back, and one of the first things I did was, probably almost at the same time, in fact, John Backer called me and said, "Do you want to make some photographs for Boreal, my boot company?" I said, "Sure." And because I'd make some photographs of Gramici products very early on when they first introduced the fee raise, like studio stuff. And the stuff that Backer wanted to do was more artistic, and he knew I was an artist. Backer always supported me as an artist. We had many, many climbs together, and he told me once, he goes, "The one thing I really want to do in my life is be a really, really, really good climber. I want to be the best climber there is. I want to be as good as I can possibly be. He goes, don't you feel that way about photography? And, I was young, and I said, yeah, oh, hell yeah, I do. And Backer, he remembered that. And since I'd made photos growing up of him, he was really into my aesthetic. And my aesthetic was the same as Glenn Danny's and Tom Frost and John Clear and all those other guys. Of the way you looked at climbing as an adventure and a risk and an aesthetic thing, and the right body position and the right everything and the right light. It meant everything. And you could get that. And I got that with Backer and with all my friends. And so when it came time, when Backer was now a business guy, and he was developing boots and designing boots and rubber and stuff like that, he said, yeah, would you make some photos? And so what I did was made some photos of these athletes that they sponsored, with probably boots and maybe not money at that point. But and what I would do is I make, it was called cubism. It was like, basically I would make 3 or 4 photos of the same person from a bunch of different angles, and I'd stick all the photos together. And it came, so you'd see these 4 separate photos overlaid, so it showed you 4 different aspects of the same thing. And they were kind of climbing related. They were hanging out. I don't know. There were various things that I'd done. And they kind of got noticed, and Boreal liked them a lot. And at the same time, Charles Cole, who was always the competitor at 5'10", really liked the ads quite a bit. And Charles is one of those guys, and he knew me well enough. He goes, well, he's a photographer. He's a professional. If you like that photographer stuff and you want to just hire the photographer. So he approached me, and so I made some photos, and Boreal got a little pissed off and wouldn't hire me back. But I made some other photos that were studio stuff of women athletes that he was sponsoring, doing pull-ups, curling weights, Rebecca.
I remember those.
That's where I met Rebecca Rush, in fact, who would later become my first Stone Nude.
And then that's about the time where I would have met you.
Yeah, that's when you would have met me as well. Yeah. And so I'm making these photographs, and at the same time, Charles, he goes, you would be world famous right now if you had like an agent, or if you just, it was. I go, whatever, I don't care. I just like making photographs. I tried making photographs for money, and I don't like it. I'll take your money, but I like making these photographs,
right.
And you let me do what I want to do. And so he actually turned me on to Sharma. And actually Lynn Hill took me to Europe, because she was working at the North Face at that time, and I was rolling video of Lynn and making some stills, and we ran into Sharma, and I got along with Chris really, really well. He was 16 at the time. And he was working with Jim Thornburg at that point. Mm-hmm. But then I think they had maybe a slight falling out or a scheduling thing. And Jim left, and Chris said, hey, you want to hang out with us? And, I'm not Jim Thornburg. Jim is an amazing photographer. I think he's way more talented than anything I can do, especially with climbing. And he's like super industrious, has all this energy. Like all the really top end guys have all this amazing energy nowadays, like Jimmy Chin and Mikey Schaefer and even Greg Epperson, who changed climbing photography. They have all this energy and all this focus on climbing, and I focus on kind of everything else and enjoying my life and being with my friends. And they do too, but my focus is a little bit more high. And but Chris and I got along really well. We got along really well because I made photos of him climbing, and I made photos of him getting high, and I didn't judge. And he was from Santa Cruz, and I was living in Santa Cruz at that point at my sister's. So we started hanging out, and I had a car. And Chris didn't, and it was just kind of like my start. And I saw that so clearly, and he goes, hey, I was living between Santa Cruz and Joshua Tree and Yosemite. And so I would take Chris to Yosemite and back. And then he was getting noticed. Charles was kind of paying me to take photos of Chris and hang out. And I kind of liked it. And one day we're in Yosemite. He's over at the Battle of the Bulge, and he jumps, he falls off the problem because he's just playing with it. And he blows out his knee. And I carried him to the car because he didn't want SAR. And we took him to the hospital, and it ends up he had an ACL. And it was kind of a really dark period for Chris's life. But at that point, I was living in Joshua, and he used to fly down there, and I'd pick him up in Ontario, and he would hang out at the Gordon Ranch, and we'd go into the park when he was rehabbing and have various kinds of trips.
Chris Sharma?
Yeah, Chris Sharma.
Holy cow.
Yeah, so I met him.
The lost era.
Yeah.
It's like when Jesus disappeared for a while.
Yeah, Jesus disappeared. And
it's like the unaccounted for years.
Yeah, they thought he was in India, but it turns out Sharma was actually in my bedroom hanging out and, getting high with all of us. And looking at things differently and making art and with us. And I could see he was really kind of like one of these. He was amazing. I could see he was an artist. I can see he was the distillation of of a generation or two of climbing, and he was a natural, almost like Lenny, you know. Lenny's also a natural. These people just are meant to climb. Like Alex Honnold is a natural.
Yeah.
And I do remember also, so when I got back, you know, into making climbing photos, I decided to hang out in Yosemite, and as soon as I got back into Yosemite, I'd been going back and forth here, but as soon as I actually made a commitment to actually hang out in Yosemite now and make my photos here, because there was up and climbing climbers, Dean Potter, there was something going on in the valley at that point, and Charles could feel it. And he said, go up there, make photos, I'll give you money. You know, you make some photos, I'll give you 500 here and there, you can make enough. Give you boots, whatever. And so I ended up showing up there, and I met Potter pretty quickly, and I had this kinship, not because we had the first name, Dean, but because he had this certain wildness, and I could feel this wildness happening. And these guys on SAR, they were all really good climbers, and they were all, you know, there was Cedar Wright, there was a bunch of guys, you know, and this energy was happening. And the Rangers were chasing everyone around, kind of like in the 70s. And, you know, there was shoplifting from the store, and out-of-bounds camping, and dope smoking, and amazing women. And this was all going on. So this would have probably been in the late 90s, for sure. And as soon as I came back to Yosemite, I go, I don't want to leave. I want to figure something out. And I was still making my photos, but there's a lot of competition, you know? And people were focusing more on the climbing action photo, color.
Right.
You know, and that's not what I was making.
Can I put a little point in here? Right in there, you did do you remember doing the like little exhibit at Rock Creation?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that triggered.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I remember
and that was because of Rebecca.
Yeah, because it was, you know, I've always had an interest in the history, and I had plenty then as well. But I just remember Bruce Anderson was there, and
I think I should get into that a little bit, because Rebecca is an amazing woman. Rebecca Rush, she's an amazing person. And so I made these photos of her. She was, I think, manager of Rock Creation at that point, and she invited me to come to Rock Creation and use the facilities, you know, and she basically saw to it that I could use them for free. And so I'd been bouldering there for a while, and not that long actually, and she knew of my history, and she knew I had these photos of the Stonemaster, and she suggested I have an exhibit in there. And so I printed up a bunch of them, and we had this. That was fun.
It was fun. I mean, to describe it, it was, you know, we turned the gym into a little gallery, and the photos were hanging from the holds, and it was an evening, and people were drinking wine.
Yeah,
and
it was nice.
Like, it wasn't a climbing evening; it was like an evening,
and it was about that generation of climbers and our little history. And then they put the photos up along the top of the gym after that, as I remembered. But and it made me really, really happy. It was the first time I'd ever really exhibited the work. I know that I tried to actually exhibit that work several other times, and people just turned it away out of hand.
No, I mean, I'm literally like getting goosebumps remembering the feeling I had looking at those photos.
Yeah, a lot of them have never been printed.
Right, and they were. I mean, now some of them are, again, they're in the zeitgeist, because they, you know, some of them have backer and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And, So I totally remember just being like, whoa, this is where. How have these been like hidden from us? It was kind of like
nobody had seen them, and I'll get to that at some point, because that was the first time they'd really been seen publicly, and the first time I had printed a bunch of these things. And it was really at that time, and actually before that, I had decided that I wanted to make a book, and I didn't know what the book was going to be, but I thought the Stonemasters could be a good one. And I remember getting a hold of John Long and asking him about it, and he didn't think that would be a good idea. And I thought, okay, well, I still want to make this book, and I'm making these climbing photos, but this art, like these old photos, they really touched this chord in me. And I thought, you know, that's your best work, and you made the work for the pure joy of making work, and then you tried to do fashion, or you did fashion or whatever, and music, but there was no joy, and you were chasing money, and then you went back to climbing these climbing photos and making portraits of people, and, you know, like, and you're happy with that, but now you're chasing money again, you know, for your work, and I don't want to do that, and I thought, you know, what do you really want to do? And I thought, I don't know. I go, what do you really like? And I go, I think it was really high, and I may have been eating a Reese's peanut butter cup. And I thought about it for a second. I go, it's peanut butter and chocolate. I go, nude, rock climbing.
All right. Part 1 of Dean Fidelman. Part 2 coming up. May already be in your feed. Likely is already in your feed. So let's just get out of here and get to part 2 of the Enormocast with Dean Fidelman. But if you do happen to climb between part 1 and part 2, you find yourself out there, of course, check your knot.
Going to release the album because they have decided that the cover is sexist.
Well, so what? But what's wrong with being sexy? I mean, there's no
Sexist.